Hey everyone, today we're talking about what to do once you have a rooted variegated monstera. So maybe you rooted this yourself, maybe you ordered it through the internet. Right now in February 2022, a cutting like this maybe goes for $100 to $200, somewhere in there. This is enough roots to get us going. We want to see those bright white roots down there, and ideally with that yellow tip. That's the yellow tip we want to see, the root cap. I don't really care about this top leaf because what I'm after is this node that has the root. And then typically on the opposite side of the root, we're going to have the new node. So eventually over time, this leaf will be eaten away by the plant while it develops. And I just want this new node to develop because that's where the new plant is going to come out of. This is our shoot, this is our root, and this is our node, the three parts we need for a new monstera. And also, as we talked about in other videos, this candy caning in this stem is going to create these marble-like leaves and even some of this mint coloring, which is my personal favorite. So just make sure your stem, this node part that has the stem cells, has good coloring and you're good to go. So first things first, once you have it rooted or it came in the mail, put it in water. It can be tap water, it can be filtered water, it doesn't really matter. This is actually a mild LECA nutrient, but you don't really want to keep the plant out of water for more than like 5 or 10 minutes. Once it dries up, you'll start getting kind of a blackening. I kind of slightly burned off this root. It will come back, but you want an actively growing root set to produce a new plant very easily. How we actually ship our plants and our cuttings is in a 50% mix of moss, sphagnum moss, and perlite. It has a mild nutrient in it, but it is nothing more than a damp moss and perlite. And we ship the plants typically wrapped in a saran wrap around this root mass so that the user can either put it straight into LECA or go into moss or an Aroid mix. And those are the options I'm going to suggest. First and foremost, for the average person, put it straight into moss with perlite and a little nutrient. That's a really great place to start with monstera. Either the case, when you start seeing a wrinkling in the stem, like it's pruned up, that is not what you want to see. Typically that's overwatering, and I have seen it be a case of underwatering when it kind of shrivels up and dries. But really nothing more complicated than a pot with drainage. This is my first option. Putting the plant in there, then simply filling back in with our moss and perlite mix. This is what we do in-house when we have plants that we're trying to progress from water cloning into moss. This is exactly what we do, and then we put them under lights. The key with cuttings is once you transplant them, make sure that this air that's around the plant is above 60-65% humidity, because this plant doesn't have much roots right now, so we don't want it transpiring and breathing out too much through this leaf. And when it does, we want it to breathe in and out a humid air, and that's going to maintain this leaf for now. Also, when a plant is continuously trying to root, because I'm not trying to add more roots to this plant before we progress it to grow it too much, we want to not punish it too much with light. We just want to add just enough light so that this plant roots down into the moss without attempting to grow yet, because if it wants to grow, then it's going to need roots to conduct photosynthesis. Those roots, once they feel that damp moss around them and this leaf has adequate humidity around it, make sure this media is not wet, it will start continuously trying to root. If you put it in too much light too early, this leaf will start to yellow off. And we've talked about this before, but the quantity of water in your moss, you should wet it and then be able to squeeze it, let it drip off, squeeze out like a sponge, and then that's my perfectly watered moss. Now, once this plant develops a little more roots in that moss, I'll probably transfer it over to an Aroid mix or potentially into LECA, but likely to an Aroid mix because that's the most consumer friendly. I really actually think the moss is the most consumer friendly. That's what I prefer, and I think it's the least chance of overwatering and root rot. If you aren't comfortable with moss, go with a simple Aroid mix. This would be my second choice after the moss. Make sure it has some perlite, some potting mix, and some good chunky rocks or wood chips. I'll link up to another video where we go ahead and make this Aroid mix, but I think that's the number 2 choice of once you get a variegated monstera, what to do with it. And as another option, an active LECA vase just like this one, where you have an air pump, an air stone, and the plant suspended in the water. Many times people will just leave kind of a jar of water with the root hanging in it, but it will rot out because it doesn't have enough oxygen in the root zone. But as a third and final choice, unless you're very comfortable with LECA, I would say go for an actively aerated LECA jar or vase, something that is a reservoir with the LECA nutrient, maybe some rocks, and then bubbling that water. And if you're not going to bubble that water, make sure that root tip is just breaching the water, just barely going into the water, or else you're going to have, and you're likely going to see, root rot. Allow this plant to reach out and go and find that water for it. Don't just supply the water immediately. Roots want to go out on a mission and go look for that water, and by doing that, they're going to expand the root system. Biggest indicator of a healthy plant is a healthy root system. So do not rot off this root system. I'd much rather have an underwater plant than an overwatered plant. So when you bring in your Variegated Monstera, give it good humidity around the leaf. Do not overwater this root, and try and use just a simple mix of moss and perlite, and then you can maybe go to an Aroid mix or go into LECA. You can always kind of switch around, and now I've even been using a mix of LECA and perlite kind of mixed through, and I just pour over water onto it. This is exactly what I'm talking about. When we grow some of our plants here, we root them and then we put them into a mix of perlite and moss and just a little food once it has more roots. And make sure you only feed once the plant actually has a root system to eat from. And remember that when you're watering too. If your plant doesn't have a lot of roots, it can't absorb that water. And also remember that with light, once you turn on that light onto the plant, it's going to try and suck up that water. But if it has no roots to do that, it's going to then eat away at these leaves. And don't worry if these cutting leaves fall off, dry off and yellow, because we're really, again, just looking for that node to start growing our new shoot. But I hope this helps you guys when you're acclimating your new Variegated Monstera to your collection. Be patient with it, grow roots first, go slowly, give it lots of humidity, and then slowly over time feed it as that root system develops, but don't overwater your plant. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you guys next week.